the homework. Yes. You talked to who? Oh, okay. Okay.
And like an interest rate changes, and so it says how does the change in interest rates affect the shape and or position of the grower's short-run supply curve? And I'm not sure, like,
Okay.
how it affects and why.
So let me start with a consider the following graph, which depicts the cost curves of a perfectly competitive seller of potatoes. Potatoes currently selling for $3 per pound. Is E and F kind of somewhat related? What happens to potatoes growers' profit as a result of the increased interest? Oh yeah, change in interest rate affect the shape or position of the grower's short-run supply curve. Okay. And what did the answer to him? Were you just unclear on what the?
Yeah, well, I haven't had a chance to look at the answer key because that was like
Oh.
I printed off some of it, but
Okay.
I didn't sound quite
Okay.
far enough. So. Like on D, I have it, or I mean E.
Yeah.
I put it as profit decreases. Is that right?
Right. So the gist of what that question's getting at is kind of the role that financing plays. When we're thinking about total cost and variable cost, in general, where does it belong? So, interest expense on a loan, right? Where does it belong? Fixed. Why? It's a monthly payment, but it doesn't vary with your output. That's the key thing you always have to fall back on as you start to think about. It doesn't vary with the output produced. So that's the independent thing, which then leaves it unaffecting marginal cost at the margin. So that's kind of a unique thing just in general that's I think a lot of businesses struggle with. It's interesting, I think we'll get into that in terms of entrepreneurial economics on how much you leverage your way in or not. Because when you're dealing with debt, you are squeezing down the operating margins to have to service that debt. And so when times are good, the banks tend to be pretty loose with lending you money. And then when things fall, that can squeeze all margins so that you're having to feed the beast, is the way one lender put it to me once. Are you having to feed the beast? And the beast is the debt. If sales are down that month, or and then you get into some businesses that are seasonal, like a restaurant might be busier during around the Christmas time or not, or whatever. During the lean months, are you having to feed the beast? Because you've set yourself up with some debt that made sense, let's say, from an annual basis, but the monthly payment is $2,000 a month every month. And so when revenues are down on a given month, you're having to kick in some money. There might be some shortfalls in that month. Okay? But independent of how many hamburgers are going out, in the case of a restaurant or whatever. Oop, no phone calls. Nobody call me. Point. No, no points. It's okay to shut down. As long as it didn't go. As long as it didn't vibrate or ring.
I say we all go on strike.
Had it been the case, then I would have, if that was the rule, then I would just keep it in my pocket and cross my fingers and not openly shut it off, right? Because there's a chance nobody would call me and you guys would never learn that.
So did somebody just call you?
No. Oh no, nobody called me. I just thought of it. Good point.
Okay.
I would just be honest then if it was vibrating in my pocket, and Sam might be able to hear it. So, no, nobody called me. Otherwise, you would get upset. Yes, definitely. All right. What else, Chelsea? Do you have a follow-up?
No, so on this one, the short run supply curve is the marginal cost.
Right.
So the marginal cost wouldn't change.
Wouldn't change. Marginal cost is unaffected. Okay, anything else on these homework problems?
Okay, when we went over the table, I thought I understood it, but like,
Okay.
I really think that I just screwed the whole thing up.
Okay.
And so I don't know like where you start, decide, but I started with total revenue, but then I just didn't know where to go with it.
Okay. Anybody want to chime in? I know what my answer would be, but where do you guys start off a table like that? What's kind of the key things going in? Very well might see a table on Friday, possibly. I haven't written it yet, but that would certainly be fair game. I gave you quite a few tables in principles classes. How do you start off that table? What's your trick? Trick of the trade.
You can start
Sam?
with total revenue and the fixed cost.
Okay, and fixed cost, what about it?
It's always the same.
Yes, okay, so it's easy to fill in. But then what's the next step? Next column you fill in? Or the next place you start? To me, there's one key thing that kind of sets off the table.
Variable.
Or whatever your cost is. Hopefully you guys know how to fill this doggone table in, so talk. Total cost, yeah, what about it? Times the quantity, okay. And so what are you relying on there between total cost, and Sam started with the total fixed cost column. Sometimes a table like this won't have a total fixed cost column. It might just say total cost. So what are you filling in, or what does that help you do? To variable costs. So variable costs are always 0. So this table, yeah. So with this table, when it was brand new, you guys might not have it in front of you, you had fixed cost of 15. I would start with your total cost being 15 when quantity is 0. So when quantity is 0, so then that kind of sets the stage. Now you can go to the what Chelsea was talking about on building up the variable cost using the marginal. So the having that definition of marginal cost, just the good old principles definition. Marginal cost is the cost of an additional unit of production.
Okay, so like, marginal cost of the same is 35.
Yep.
You take that times 2 for, or do
No.
you add the 35?
No, and that's where you need to have that. I'm glad you brought that up. The cost of an additional unit of production. So when we did it in principles class, we said the cost of the first unit is, what is it, 30?
Yeah.
And the cost of the second unit is 35.
So you can just combine them.
Therefore, you combine them, right? So this is hanging tight on your principles definitions. That's what I mean. You got to know know those inside and out. I mean, this is where it gets down to the nitty gritty. Having those basic principles definitions are important. They can save you. So yes. So then, variable cost with 1 unit is 30. Variable cost associated with 2 units is the sum of the 2. And then by that time, if you start filling in the table, you can start to look at how total cost is changing also. You know, and hopefully it all matches up. Okay. Anything else on that one? Yeah.
Okay, so then on the third unit, when it
Yep.
goes up to 42, then you just add the difference from 35 to 42.
Cost of the third unit is 42. Okay.
So you just add the difference from 35 to 42.
No.
the sum of all of them.
No. So let's. We got a total variable cost column, and you got a total fixed cost column, or a total cost column. I'm kind of going in the way your table is here, and your total fixed cost. So what Sam started off with was 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 15, 15, 15, all the way down. So then what I was saying I think is handy is for a key for starting off the table is that when you're producing no units, we know that variable cost is zip, and therefore total cost is 15. Then we learned that the cost associated with the first unit is 30, which means variable cost kicked in, giving us 45 units of total cost, $45 worth of total cost. The cost of the second unit was 35, meaning that this jumped up by 35. So it's okay to go back to the totals, which I think you were kind of trying to do, but don't go back, don't look at the difference here at the marginals. So the total cost went up by 35, giving you a 70 here, 80 here. Or you could also think that, oh, variable cost went up by 35, giving me a grand total of 65. Or as a double check, notice how we can double check and triple check now. 15 plus 65 equals 80. And then the third unit, 42. So the cost of the third unit was 42. You might think of adding 42 to our variable cost. Plus 15, 122.
So when the fixed cost goes up, like for the second table, does the marginal cost on all of them stay the same?
Fixed cost did not go up for the problem. If I'm understanding you right. Oh, wait, it does. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. That's for part D. Part E, the marginal cost went up. I jumped to E. So you're right. Part D, the fixed cost suddenly rises to 30. How should Nancy alter her production?
So do you include that 30 in the next table? Or do you leave it?
So you could do a brand new table, and the only thing that's going to change here are this column and this column, right? But now the changes won't. So check this out. So this becomes 45, 45, 45, 45, right? This becomes 45, 75, 111, right? I'm just bumping up by the fixed cost. But now look at the difference. What's the difference between 45 and 75? 30. Bingo. So the differences, which is what marginal cost is, the change in total cost over the change in quantity, or which is equivalent to the change in total variable cost over the change in quantity. Of course, this column didn't change at all, so there's no change in marginal cost. So fixed cost, and that ties back to the problem that we started off with the interest rates. When we change fixed cost, it doesn't change your marginal cost curve, which is the supply curve. Okay. Any other last follow-up on that one? These are good fundamentals that you should have down for the next test anyway. And really moving forward, this cost curve stuff, this is the rest of the year. I mean, this applies to monopoly and to monopolistic competition and possibly even oligopoly in certain cases. All right, good on that. Any other homework problems? Nope. All right. So why don't you pass those in?
Does the marginal cost always equal change in
It's yeah. Okay, you can figure it either way because one implies the other. The only costs that do change are our variable costs. Yeah, whatever you turn in now, I'm going to return these to you before we leave, so don't let me forget. But those of you who turned it in, I'm just going to do a quick eyeball check and give it back to you for studying. But don't work on it now, those of you who didn't turn it in. It's late right now, so you won't get any credit.
What partial credit is available?
Half. Yep. But the real credit is doing it because the test.
You don't have like freebie for
No freebie. No freebie. Still worth doing though, for sure, for multiple reasons. Even half the points is still pretty decent. Still an F, but still pretty decent. Okay. So, let's talk about reviewing the whole thing.
I was just cheering for failure.
Cheering for the. But 50% is a heck of a lot better than 0%. Oh.
It's for students not checking the sentence. That
So, the material we got for this test, we have income substitution effects stuff. So I think I'll just maybe open it for questions once I give you one little example here of why we're doing it. And it does bring up some questions. So we're back to consumption space of goods. And so maybe we got back to our cars and something. What's our other something? Anything.
Wine.
Pizza, wine. We'll do wine. So cars and pizza, or cars and wine. So we got a few cases of wine here. So we've got a budget constraint. And let's say we are currently maximizing utility at U1. What's going on at this optimal quantity of cars and wine in terms of these two things? What's our first order condition for utility maximization? What needs to happen? What's our condition? What is that graph showing? We're optimally choosing wine and cars at these two quantities. Good. The marginal rate of substitution of what for what? In other words, I guess if we think about the marginal rate of substitution, it's the marginal utility of what's on top? Wine. Which we'll use the notation, the MRS of wine for cars. Is equal to the price ratio of the two. So slope of the indifference curve is this. Slope of the budget line is this. So we've got our equations for the budget constraint. We're going to, our general consumer problem is to maximize total utility. Where usually here we've got our generic functional form of utility is some function of wine and cars. Sometimes we had the little Cobb-Douglas with a raised to the 0.2 power, 0.5 power, whatever it is. We're not doing calculus, so if you were asked to kind of work a problem like this, the marginal utilities would be given to you. We worked through a number of problems like that. Maximize total utility from wine and cars subject to a budget constraint. So we have some income that we're going to spend on, some spending on wine and some spending on cars. So there's our budget constraint. So from this picture we've got a budget line and an indifference curve. All right, so if wine gets cheaper, we get happier. Right? kind of works out nice. Well, and if wine gets cheaper, holding quality constant, of course.
Okay.
If wine gets cheaper, we get happier, holding quality constant. And so the budget line rotates out if there's a decrease in the price of wine. So a decrease in the price of wine causes a rotation outward of the budget line. Our increase in happiness is going to be shown by us being able to be out on a higher indifference curve. Now consuming W2 and C2. So the whole income substitution dissection comes about from the idea that wine being cheaper is kind of like having more money. It's kind of like being a little richer. That's the income effect. And the substitution effect is that if wine goes down, we're going to tend to buy more wine and less cars. But as we've shown here, we're actually buying more of both. And that's partially due to this income effect that is mixed in with the substitution effect. So the trick to this is to bring the new budget line back to the old level of utility. So using the old golf club here, we get a new, if I try to do this parallel, I guess we're somewhere, let's say mine is here, I guess. So the new price ratio dropped back to the old utility level, the old indifference curve, gives me this amount, which means holding happiness constant at my old level. If you were to drop the price of wine, this is how much more wine I'd buy and how much less cars I would, holding that utility. That's my substitution effect of wine for cars. So then the income effect, this is kind of an intermediate step here, WS or whatever you want to call it. I can't remember how your book did it or if they did anything. So at the end of the day, we moved from this W1 to here ultimately to W2, and so the remainder is the income effect. So had we given a level of income back to you of this amount, which is giving you a lump sum transfer, then we could put you back to where you ended up. Right? So we're just dissecting the income effect and substitution effect. Michael?
As far as trying to like keep it straight for ourselves and sample test, rather than using brackets, are you okay with us doing arrows so they kind of start using both? Where it shows like
Oh, yeah, moving one direction or whatever, yeah. And the effect is actually on the quantities.
yeah.
So you can just identify the quantities or whatever, yes. But you mean just some sort of arrow like this
Yeah,
or whatever?
like the substitution effect.
It actually was on both sides, wasn't it? Because it does work backwards. Had we started here and dropped back, then you can kind of work it like.
Yeah.
Oh, because it was positive. It was one way, yeah.
More so
yeah.
the income effect would be the one that I would
Right.
worry about.
Yeah, when we start looking at normal and inferior goods and stuff.
Where's the income effect?
The income effect is from here to here. So it's this little. And the same is true, by the way, here. When you look at the other good, there's an income and substitution effect as well. So cars went from here to here was the substitution effect. And then we had a big income effect that brought us back up to here.
So for this example, for wine, the income effect is smaller, but for cars, the income
different sizes on both, different things going on both axes. You're kind of dissecting it for both.
Okay, so does it make sense to think of it like, because I always get confused which is negative effect and which is substitution effect.
Okay.
Substitution effect is like the point where it was on the indifference curve the first time and the point where it is on it the second time.
Yeah.
The budget line is
Yeah, so let me just give you a couple notes the way my brain, as far as kind of memorizing which one's which. So for the substitution effect, you are subbing one good for the other at the old utility level. Old being before the price change.
Right.
So you always drop back to the other indifference curve in a parallel fashion. And then so I guess the word substitution is that you're always going to be increasing one and decreasing the other. So kind of the law of demand, decrease the price of wine, I buy more wine and less of the other. So there's a substitution going on between the two. So you're always going to get that, assuming that you've got a downward sloping indifference curve, a normally shaped indifference curve. You're always going to get that answer of substitution of one for the other. The income effect is the amount of income necessary to well, let me think. I was going to do it one. I go back and forth a little bit on this one. So, amount of income necessary to put you back to the new indifference curve or utility level. Which is going from here to here. My alternative that I was kind of going around that might be a better way to do it is there was a change in happiness that was done. Economists' knee-jerk reaction is, why would you ever buy somebody a Christmas present when you could give them an equal amount of money and they'd be better off because they could go buy their own gift, right? Now we know that there's other issues that come in, but that's kind of remember the whole rational thing with the Freakonomics deal of, well, if you give them 2 cents, I would say 2 cents is better than nothing, and if I decline it, I won't get anything. Well, so there's a change in happiness here. Whether it was an increase in price, decrease in price, you either got happier or you got sadder, right? And so this income effect is that income adjustment that puts you back to your old or new, depending on which direction you're going, right? So if we were made happier with the decrease in price of wine, so now how much money would I need to take away from you to get you back to the same happiness level? See what I'm saying? So it's like kind of the ultimate equalizer is to say there's always some amount of money I can take from you. I don't know how much that is, but there's some amount of money I could take away from you. Because if you really don't like wine anyway and you don't buy a lot of it, then a decrease in the price of wine is not going to help you out very much, right? If we had shaped indifference curves like that. So there's always an amount of income that can be taken away or given, depending on which direction we're going, to restore that. So let me put that as the last comment under the income effect. So amount of income that keeps utility constant after a price change. That's probably worth putting a couple extra things on. So A decrease in price means there is some income to take away. An increase in price means there is some income to give as compensation for your loss. An increase in price hurts you. However, if I give you some money, I can buy you off somehow. The reason I want to be careful with this is it's important when it comes to government programs, subsidizing, general equilibrium analysis, the whole thing of transfer payments. That's kind of what this is speaking to. So let me give you an example in international trade. If I lower tariffs, that's going to hurt some of our domestic producers of chopsticks that are exporting or that are in the chopstick business or whatever. Somehow, it'd really be with importers, I'm not telling the best story here, but somehow if I affect the price of your good in a negative way, I can compensate you with some other direct payment to make up for that price change. It's always possible to make up for a price change with some amount of money, given our normally shaped indifference groups. Okay. Anything else on income substitution effect? All right. What's our next chapter? Production. Very similar. So we roll into isoquants and isocosts, putting our business hat on. This is more of our engineering cap almost, in a sense, because the isoquant is an engineering thing. If you were going to college for engineering, you'd be learning about production technologies and how much of each element you put in to make something, right? Sometimes you can use more labor, sometimes more capital. And so our picture looks very similar. We're going to have resources that we're plugging into production. Those resources cost something. And we've got a level of production that's determined by whatever technology we have with the production function. Our picture looks strikingly the same. I probably could have been cutesy and said that we've got kites and lollipops, right? Kites and lollipops, and the picture would have looked the same, right? Here's kites, lollipops, utility. I optimally choose amount of kites and lollipops to maximize utility. So the picture, the mathematics are exact. But the fundamentals are different in the sense that we have a production function Q. So our ultimate goal can be twofold. Maximize production given a cost constraint. Our production is some function of the resources we are employing. This is a Q. So our quantity of output is some function of the resources we're using. I got some machines, I got some computers, I got a building, I've got Tom, Dick, and Harry working for me, right? I use my labor and capital together and I make some hamburgers. So that relationship looks like this, given the trade-offs of the two. It can be flatter, it can be steeper, it can be curvier, it can be flatter. Then you go back to the same properties we had with indifference curves. Capital and labor might be pretty good substitutes for each other. They might suck as substitutes depending on what type of good we're making, right? You can't easily substitute a human being for a machine. In other applications, it might be easy to substitute a machine for a human being. So the shape of the isoquant embodies the technology that you're using at hand. And that's all captured in this production function. So we're going to maximize our production subject to a cost constraint. So our total cost comes to us now in the form of how much money we're going to spend on labor plus how much money we're going to spend on capital. I've got units of labor, and I've got the price for each unit of labor. Typically, if this is hours of labor, this is the wage rate. If we're renting a piece of machinery, this is 4 hours worth of rental at a rate of $35 an hour. So we went through questions like that. So maximize production for a given cost constraint. I know that my budget is $1,000. What's the best way to spend $1,000? How am I going to do it? What is the optimal level of capital and labor to produce? That comes to us by something very similar to this. The slope of the isoquant is the marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital, which is the marginal product of labor over the marginal product of capital. So we start weighing off the trade-offs of, wow, well, labor can kick out 10 hamburgers, but the machine can only kick out 3, right? We start to think about the physical trade-offs of productivity of the resources. And in equilibrium, the optimal quantities, that's going to be where the price of labor, which is the wage, equals the rate, where that marginal rate of technical substitution is equal to the price ratio, or the slope of the isocost line. So this sucker here is the isoquant, and this little guy here is the isocost. What does the word iso mean? Or the prefix here, iso? Same, equal. I don't know what the literal interpretation is, but that's all we're saying is that along this line, this quantity, this quantity, this quantity, this, anywhere along here, all of these combinations of labor and capital cost me the same. They're an isocost curve. I could be anywhere along here and it'll cost me the same. But you don't want to be here, given the fact that this is possible, because that means you're not doing what we said you were going to do. At Q, I guess let's call it 0 just to keep the numbers in line. We could be here where we're spending the same amount of money, but we're not maximizing production. We could be on a higher isoquant. All right, questions on that one? The dual to that problem, the other way of thinking about it, which might be more realistic in this case, is to minimize cost, minimize total cost subject to a quantity constraint. that might be more realistic in a number of business settings, is to say, hey, I know that we have an order for next week for 3 crates of wine or 3,000 crates of wine or whatever it is. What's the best way to do that? Well, let's do it in the cost minimal way, right? So let's minimize costs subject to a quantity constraint. So with that problem, you can kind of think of, well, I know that I want 3,000 crates of wine. Given the current wage rate, what is the best level to do? I want to minimize cost. The further into the origin I am, the lower my costs are. There's one line that would be coming right through here, apparently, the way I've got this. And that would tell you to hire this much labor and this much capital. Same problem, get the same result, just kind of a different way. The math is slightly different, essentially. Because you're starting now with quantity being equal to 3,000, and you're working it kind of backwards, or you're flipping it around. So it's called the dual problem. All right, questions on that one?
Simple calculus is there, and just saying, hey,
I'd probably accept that if it's applicable. You're going to have to use your judgment on if it's there. Usually, again, I'd be giving you the marginal products or something, and it'd probably be just as easy to use the numbers that are there. But yeah, if you wanted to, that'd be fine. I encourage you to take on the calculus if you want to take that approach. Okay. All right. So, then 7, we got into our cost curves, which are another level of detail. One thing I might, I guess, highlight in this little review would be, this brings up some short run, long run concepts, right? Is where we talked about this, because typically in the short run we think of capital being fixed. So that's where we said, suppose capital is 3 machines, plug it in, working with that constraint that K is fixed at some level and you can't change it, what's the best way to produce? So just thought I'd bring that up. In the long run, both K and L can adjust. That ties in nicely to our cost curves. So total variable plus total fixed. We will often talk about the averages. So I've probably said this 100 times already, to those of you who had me for principles class, but it's worth doing again. Know this inside and out. Be able to replicate this by memory, at least. You've got about 5 formulas going on, or 6 formulas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got about 5 formulas wrapped up into one concept here. Because if I blank this off, we see that total cost equals average total. There's 2, there's 3, there's 4, the sum of the 2, and then there's 5, the sum of the averages equals this. Graphically, that bears out with our normal picture like this. The one that we typically don't draw, but I'm going to do it this time. The average fixed cost, given this equation, is the vertical distance between these two, which if I transplant that down to here, I could, and let me take this distance here. Maybe I'll do 3 of them. This distance here. And then something over here. We get our average fixed cost. looks like that. If you draw it appropriately, the reason we don't draw it a lot is because it's just kind of excess baggage because we already have it as the vertical distance between the two U-shaped curves. So average fixed, because as I produce more units, my average fixed is going to continue to fall because it's fixed to begin with. So that's our generic picture there. The most important one, of course, is missing, and that is our marginal cost, which is the change in total cost from a change in quantity, which we learned is equivalent to the change in variable. Graphically, that cuts through these minimum points, which we've learned is very useful as we solve for things later in perfect competition. Because sometimes we can just set that equation equal to that equation and we get this quantity down here. So that's your basic picture for cost. We went through the schedule today, which kind of ties a lot of that or reinforces that. That was out of the perfect competition picture. For perfect competition, since we just came out of there, we don't have to spend too much time, but the picture that you should have memorized for the test would be this one. The price taker, demand equals marginal revenue, the long run equilibrium, the firm's earning 0 economic profits, produces this quantity. Hopefully we've done it so many times you can do it in your sleep. Here's the market. Here's the representative firm. Marginal cost. That would be a good one to throw in there. That's long run equilibrium in perfect competition. 0 profits. Firm maximizes profit by producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit equals the cost of the last unit. And then it's just a matter of working those problems, having the principles down and working through some of the math. Okay. Questions?